I'd like to go to Dr. Saplan next to talk more about some blind spots. I personally, I don't know what I don't know. So how do I, as a white colleague, how do I begin this journey? What are some more blind spots?
That's a great point, Dr. Swanson, and thank you to Dr. Gill for opening up that conversation. I'm coming to you from the Valley of Mānoa, the land of Kanaka Maoli, and I'm very excited to share this space with you all. I'd like to discuss and to connect to that point, Dr. Swanson, on a lot of what we can do as facilitators of learning and facilitators of honesty and truth is looking at things and zooming out of our craft and understanding how structure can impact our learners, specifically our BIPOC learners. I'd like to share the phenomena of code switching with you all, which is shifting from one linguistic code to another, and what that means in spaces of academia, specifically within a choral rehearsal. I know for many BIPOC individuals, myself included, there is a way of being and a way of manifesting my language, both verbally and non-verbally, in front of people that feel safe, in front of content that feels safe, and a way of performing my race, performing my diversity when I'm existing in academia. I think it's important for all of us to call out the fact that as higher education professionals, there is an issue with terminology when we search for the word performance practice, when we perform diversity, when we perform works outside of our cultural purview, because all of that facilitates and is contingent upon the fact of how our learners code switch in and out of our classroom. If we have a learner that exists in one environment with their safety with the circle of safety that they have outside of the higher education institution, and they have another individual that they can still maintain that realm of code, and then walk into a classroom and having to exist outside of a realm of safety and manifest a different way of being and manifest a different language while interacting with their culture or an artifact of their culture or a song of their culture, facilitated in ways that exist outside of their arena of code switching, that provides deep and incredibly harmful realms of learning and cognitive practice. So I think for all of us as facilitators of learning need to understand that our learners of color, that all learners within our learning space are incredible code switchers that shift in and out of their realms of identities. So as we're facilitating this repertoire, as we're facilitating conversation, as we're facilitating our own bias, we need to be aware of what type of environment we're presenting. Are we presenting an environment in ways that invite connection, in ways that present our expertise, not necessarily as hierarchical, but one that seeks curiosity in ways that are reverent and are ways that place the learner in spaces of ownership? I think if we reflect on that component, on how we think about our craft, what it means to be a conductor, what it means to be a director of choral activities, and unpack those realms of power towards connection, I'm excited to see the change that can come from that reflection.
Absolutely. This is just exposing how inherently choral music since its founding has not been truly inclusive, and how ways that we are living out and being complicit with racism and not necessarily knowing it at all. And so I would love to invite into the conversation with Dr. Packwood, just perhaps a personal experience that you've had with racism or one that you've observed within choral music and within academia. I think talking about this and bringing it to light is just a way we can move forward together.
Thank you so much. I'm going to say some things that will probably not be politically correct. Forgive me now. I am old and I am trying to learn. So that's just it. And I will tell you a brief story about that right now. As a young child, my mother and I watched Vanessa Williams win the Miss America pageant, or was it USA? Miss America, I think it was Miss America pageant. And I was very excited watching this. And my mother was doing something. I want to say she was sewing. And so she would look over her glasses every once in a while, and she'd look, and I'd say, "Oh, Mom, she made the top 15." And my mom would look, and she'd say, "Oh, okay." And she'd go back to what she was doing. And she got to the top 5. And I was screaming, "Mom, Mom, look, look, look." And then they announced her as the winner. And I jumped up and I screamed, "Mom, the black girl won, the black girl won." And my mom, who was much older, my mom had me very late in life. My mom, who was much older, looked over her glasses and said, "That's a pretty colored girl." I became enraged. And I turned to my mother and I said, "What do you mean colored? She's black," is what I said. And my mother sat me down that day and explained to me where it had come before colored, and then where it came before Negro, and where it had come, how that transformed. And years later, when I came to Mississippi State, I went out to meet a man about a storage unit. And he was an elderly man. I know he was in his 80s, and he wrote everything down, and it took him a long time to do it. And I'm just trying to get him, I just want my storage unit, you know, and he's writing this stuff down. And he says, "So, what brings you down to these parts?" And I said, "Well, I'm teaching at Mississippi State." I was very proud of that. And he said, "Oh, that's great. I taught at Mississippi State for 30 years. I was on the lawn maintenance, blah, blah, blah." I said, "Oh, that's great to hear." He goes, "So what are you teaching?" And we just had this little conversation. And in midway in the conversation, he says, "You know what? There's another Negro that works over there. Do you know him?" And I thought, holy cow. And it was like getting hit by a truck, because we had had a very pleasant exchange, I thought. And then he said this to me. This was 8 years ago. This was not a long time ago. Yeah, this was 8 years ago. And I thought to myself, and before I could respond, I heard my mother saying, "Remember how this works, you know, these wordings." And I was so glad that story came back to me from my mother, because I don't know this, I didn't know this man, but I knew we had a pleasant exchange. And in the context of what he was asking, I don't think he meant any harm. So I had to take a moment and sort of live in that for just a minute, and, you know, just be who my mother raised me to be, and be kind and go on. So I got here, and I had a young administrative assistant, and I wanted, for my first concert, I wanted to do a beautiful reception afterwards. And I said to the young lady, I said, "Holland, we need to find a reception place." And she came back and said, "We're going to meet the lady tomorrow morning at this place at 8 o'clock. So I show up there at about 7:45, and I walk into the building, and the lady looks at me, and she didn't say anything. And I just sat down, and she continued to do what she was doing. I was waiting on my associate to come, my assistant, my office assistant. And so my office assistant walks in, and the lady turned and said, "Oh, hi, can I help you? Who are you?" And now she hasn't said a word to me, and I've been sitting there for 15 minutes. And she said, "I'm Holland." She goes, "Oh, yes, I talked to you yesterday. Let me show you the place." And Holland is looking at me. She's a young white girl. And she's sort of looking at me, and I decided I'm gonna let this lady waddle in this for a minute, because Holland doesn't make the decisions, I make the decisions. So Holland, you know, just sort of looked weird and didn't know what to do. And the lady said, come on back. And I just got up and followed them, and she took us back to the room, and she sort of looked at me strangely and said, "How can I help you?" And my office assistant jumped in and said, "This is Dr. Packwood." And she said, "Oh, you're Dr. Packwood." Now, I don't know, all I know is what happened. So I have to take that at face value. I had to take that at face value. And I sort of gave her a hard time with that as well. And I'll tell you one more story. I've got a lot of stories here in Mississippi about these type things. I was called to the Office of Admissions and Scholarships with my band director. And I'd been here 2 or 3 years. And so my band director came over, she said, hey, you want to go over together? I said, sure, let's go over together. So we rode over, and she and I walked into the meeting room, and there were 2 or 3 ladies sitting there. We were about 10 minutes early, and the ladies greeted my colleague and said, oh, how are you? Because she'd been there 29 years, they knew her. And he said, oh, how are you? And great. And they just said hi to me, didn't introduce themselves, just kind of said hi. I said hi, so I sat down. So we're sitting there, and about 15 minutes later, 5 minutes after the meeting was to start, she looked over and said, Mrs. Lance, do you know when Dr. Packwood is gonna get here? And Miss Lance was mortified. She said, this is Dr. Packwood. She thought I was Mrs. Lance's assistant, because I couldn't possibly have been Dr. Packwood. And I will say this I've got lots of examples, but I think what is important to all of us who care about equality and inclusion, it's important that we work for policy and procedural changes, that we put ourselves in the room where it happens, as someone said, that we make a way to the room. And once we get in there, we make concerted efforts to change the policies that maybe some don't see as barriers, for whether they are audition procedures. We had a lot of those in place when I got here. Audition procedures that, because of a student's background, may disqualify them or make it much more difficult for them to become members of that department. So and these examples that I give to you today I had one this morning. I got an email at 5 o'clock this morning that I just thought, my chair is not, he doesn't get it yet. And I've decided in the last 6 months, I will call these things out to my superiors. So I called it out to him, who I love him very well, and he didn't realize. And now it's a part, at least that instance is a part of him. I don't know if he'll do it again. And if he does, then I'm willing to go back and say, now let's talk about this XYZ as well. So it's important that we put ourselves in position and we gain allies in that manner to help support those types of changes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Packwood, for sharing those stories. And, I just would love for all of us to just take a breath right now. And I also want to invite our panelists to comment on anything we've talked about so far, or if you'd like to move forward. I know we need to be sensitive with the overall time, but also don't want to be rushing. So I'll just pause there for a moment. Anyone would like to add, or if we should move on, either way. Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Packwood, for bringing to consciousness for so many of us just daily experiences that you have had, and grateful for your vulnerability and sharing